Hello, and today on Meaning we have the privilege of hosting Professor Jukka Savolainen from the Wayne University in the United States, who studies sociology. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And I wanted to talk today, if you'd like, about a certain research you had about race and policing.
Yeah, race and policing obviously has been a giant topic in the United States for a while, even before George Floyd, but especially after. And I guess my main message probably about that is that it's a great example of where ideological concerns, political concerns have overtaken proper scientific analysis. So we have a situation in the United States where recently, actually, under President Trump, he decided to terminate these policies that were implemented during the Biden administration called consent decrees, which basically means that police departments are put under federal oversight under the claim that they have engaged in racist discriminatory practices. And some of my research that I've looked at, I've actually looked at a very big report, major report that the U.S. Justice Department published under the Biden administration, claiming that Minneapolis Police Department engaged in discriminatory policing, and that was in the aftermath of the George Floyd events. And what I found appalling about the report, as a sociologist, as somebody who studies statistics on crime, I'm a former director of the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data, and so I should know a thing or two about criminal justice statistics. But you don't even have to be that much of an expert. Even if you're an undergrad, or in my class anyways, if you wrote a report like that, I wouldn't accept it. My main reason is this. It's about disparities in police contact. And one would think, if you know anything about policing and crime, that the first thing you would look at is your engagement in crime, all right? You're more likely to get in contact with the police if you are suspected of a crime or if you're in the process of committing a crime. But this report talks about all kinds of disparities. But one thing it doesn't mention or doesn't directly address is the fact that in Minneapolis, where 18% of the population are African Americans, 89% of that population is responsible for all the homicides. So you would think that things like that would be mentioned in the report, that there are disparities in criminal involvement. And that might explain, all right, so we know that men are 20 times more likely to be, police is in the U.S., 20 times more likely to use lethal violence towards men than women. And I don't think anyone would, have any trouble explaining why that is. It's because men are more likely to be criminal or violent. So why don't we apply the same framework when we explain racial disparities?
So when there are disparities in reality, and we try to research what causes those disparities, right, or whether those disparities are because of over-policing or because just policing. Let me give you an example from this morning. I wasn't involved in any criminal activity here in the US, but let's say somebody is anti-Semite.
Right.
So I went today to two supermarkets. One I bought all kinds of groceries, and one I went with my friend, and I didn't take a receipt from the first supermarket. So let's say the owner of the second supermarket is racist or maybe anti-Semite. He would see a Jew. Let's check your bag. Oh, you have many groceries. They are from my store. You stole them from me. He would call the police, and then they would be maybe arrested or something like that about stealing from his shop. So this instance, if somebody is really suspecting some Jews or some blacks or whatever, could cause somebody to be arrested, somebody to be maybe convicted of a criminal thing he might not did. Maybe this is something that those disparities show, that if we are suspecting blacks, we would cause an extra being in this criminal activity.
So if I'm following your question, I think the challenge in demonstrating disparities is to show that the driving reason why somebody was arrested or got into contact has to do with these external characteristics that are independent of the actual behavior. That's a challenge in all this research. That's why it's hard to demonstrate. But I guess my point is that in order for us to establish or even suggest that there is some bias in policing, you have to do a decent effort in accounting for differences in behavior. Okay, so just because you have disparities in outcome, it doesn't mean that it's based on. It may be based on the fact that there are disparities in the behavior that results in the outcome of like policing, or that there may be a discrimination. Okay, and there are certainly examples in sociological research, very good studies that show, for example, discrimination in job applications or job search. For example, you have found in the U.S. that when you send identical CVs or resumes, otherwise identical, but you have the race of the person or the sex of the person or so forth, and everything else is the same. It's a randomized trial, randomized experiment known as audit studies. That yes, employers in the U.S. they do discriminate against black people because everything else is equal. But the challenge in like real life situations is everything else is equal. How do you demonstrate that in research? There's a black economist, Roland Fryer, who did an excellent study, who collected a lot of data on these issues and examined how people get into police contacts, how they behaved in those circumstances. And he actually found out that when it came to police shootings, not just lethal shootings, but all shootings, all else equal, okay? It's not a randomized experiment because you cannot obviously randomized experiment.
You don't want to.
Right, exactly. But as close as you can get with statistical adjustments, found no evidence that police was shooting more black civilians than white civilians. He found some evidence of sort of like roughing up and that type of things, but even those differences were very small. And even I should say, again, since I'm a nerd, since I'm a professor, I know about this stuff. So George Floyd happened 2020. There was an article published in the Annual Review of Criminology in 2019 by very top-notch scholars. And it was it had to do with disparities in policing and concluded that we just don't have evidence, based on some of these challenges. So that was before Fryer study, wasn't part of that. So basically it's hard to, but the best studies, when you look at them critically, there wasn't any solid evidence. So I was personally shocked how massive the reaction was regarding the George Floyd incident, because my nerd brain was telling me that there's no solid evidence. I believe the science, kind of thing, but nevertheless, people don't simply care about it. They care about the narrative, and they care about the images that they see. But there really isn't any good evidence. Best evidence that I've seen in criminology. There are also studies of policing where they compare black and white police officers in same jurisdictions, and again try to make everything else equal. And find that there's no difference between black officers versus white officers. They're equally likely to arrest black, and there's no disparities in there. So those type of things all kind of point to. So my honest opinion is that there is just very little solid scientific evidence in support of any meaningful disparities or discrimination in policing. There's a lot of police brutality, okay, in the U.S. For example, there were before George Floyd happened, there was a similar death took place in Dallas, I think, and Tony Timpa was this gentleman's name who was a victim, white person. Nobody knows about Tony Timpa because he's a white person, but very similar circumstances as George Floyd, that type of thing.
And what was the reaction of your friends, your colleagues, your fellow professors about George Floyd? If like the man on the street or the 10th grader or something like that, he would react from his stomach. So I understand that a professor for maybe statistics or for sociology, he should react as a pro.
Right, good question. I would say in public, the predominant reaction was this sort of fueling the flames, kind of fanning the flames of those are the vocal ones. There's a bit of so most professors, most sociologists, most criminologists tend to be pretty left-wing. I am, as a matter of fact, my voting behavior is more left-wing than right-wing, but I'm not in this business because of politics. I'm in this business of finding out the truth. Okay, but it seems to me that the field has moved into a different direction. In private, oftentimes when you talk to people, they agree and they say so. But in public, I'll give you an example. I mentioned the study of comparing black and white police officers. There's one study that was published in a major journal, PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It basically, the short version is this, that it was retracted after hundreds, some 700 and more social scientists, including sociologists, criminologists, signed a petition demanding its retraction because the article was used in a congressional hearing as a testimony by Heather McDonald, among other people, and who I heard you had interviewed. And it was in the aftermath of, basically the argument was that they found a trivial error, inaccuracy, not even in the article itself, but in the sort of public-facing summary of the article. They used a little careless language. And nothing to do with the actual research. It went over like 3 rounds of post-publication reviews, but they still somehow managed to retract it. So erase it from the literature, this study that showed no evidence of...
Oh, it was erased?
It was erased, it was retracted, canceled, if you will. And even the editors of the journal admitted, kind of naively, that it was because the way it had been used in political. So there was this little error in a summary that's not even in the abstract of the article, but in the public-facing summary of the article.
Which the professor didn't even write himself.
They wrote it. They actually had to approve it, and and it was already corrected. It had already been corrected. There was a correction addressing it already, but that wasn't enough. It had to be killed from the literature, and to me that was a very embarrassing moment, and especially embarrassing that the editors would actually say that the reason this is completely inappropriate. There are guidelines of when it's appropriate. They're called ethics guidelines of when you're supposed to investigate and retract an article, and this article met none of those guidelines.
It seems like the Inquisition is working too hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in the Middle Ages, and maybe the academia is spending too much of its prestige as professionals, as experts, and I think that we are going to see in the years to come that people don't trust the academia anymore.
Absolutely. That's what's been happening. That's the big picture. That's kind of been one of my major sources of my sort of activism, is because I care about these things. I started studying this for a reason. From an early age, I became interested in social sciences. I think studying human behavior, social behavior, is the most interesting thing. Some people study the galaxies or animals and nature and whatever. But to me, humans and people in social situations are very interesting. And I think this is soiling my big intellectual love. And so that's why it's worth fighting for, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
And for coming to my show. Jukka Savolainen from the Wayne University in the United States. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.